The reading comes from John, chapter 15, verses 1 to 17. One of my favourite readings, Jesus, the true vine. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me, those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another.
Not bad service around here. I wish the gospel writers thought about how difficult it would be reading in English some of these sentences, because they repeat, don't they? But they repeat because there's something very important that needs to be repeated. Because I don't know about you, but I'm not always the best at remembering things. As you saw, I couldn't even follow actions very well when they're right in front of me. I don't know if it's a little bit of some sort of coordination issue, but it's hard to remember all the things that you need to do. I really struggle with it. I've never been great at singing rounds. If one group is singing a verse and then another group, I'm like, there's words just jumbling around my head and I find it hard to follow something. I don't know if others are like that. So I need lots of different ways and repeating things to get them in my head. And so, like we talked about earlier when we opened this, somehow we've become used to hearing about sanitising our hands, about QR codes, which a lot of us had never even heard of before, about the case numbers. That phrase has a very distinct meaning to us now, and something that was quite extraordinary maybe 18 months ago or 2 years ago has now become our ordinary life. Would you agree? Yeah, strange, isn't it? Eugene Peterson once said, Christian spirituality means living in the mature wholeness of the whole gospel. It means taking all of the elements of your life, kids, spouse, job, weather, possessions, relationships, and experiencing them all as an act of faith. God wants all the material of our lives. I'm not sure if I really experience my life thinking every little moment is an expression of faith. To be honest, a lot of the things I do is habitual and I'm on autopilot. Have you ever driven somewhere and you think, I can't even remember what route I took, but here I am? Or you just drive somewhere on autopilot and then you forget the turn because you're actually supposed to go the other way? We're habitual creatures. Today we're looking at the beautiful words of John that Lou shared with us. But first, I just wanted to touch on, just to give us some perspective on John. Did you realise that Mark was the first gospel written, and Matthew and Luke followed quite closely together, and they're written therefore in a pretty similar era. It was very, very new church time, and they retold the life of Jesus in a very purposeful way. They focused on things very decidedly, and if we look at themes of following Jesus through these Gospels, we're left with a very immediacy of following Jesus. The disciples left everything and followed. You're familiar with that, aren't you? They left their family commitments, their jobs, their homes. And if we meditate on these passages, which is great to do so, we're left considering what we're hanging on to and what needs to be let go to take those steps following, and thinking about what needs to be left behind. They're great things to consider. But when you look at John's gospel, it comes from a very different perspective. It's 60 years after the birth of Christ. And listeners are a little bit more seasoned followers of Jesus. Does that make sense? The early church has hung out with each other for a few decades now. And you know what happens when you hang out with people after a few decades? You know about them. Maybe that's easier to love them. Maybe it's harder. You know all the quirks. John is an old fella now. And they're all doing their best to continue to follow God. And the message rather leaves us, rather than a leave it all and follow, it's saying kind of, hang in there. Keep it up. Stay deeply focused. Abide in me. Stay in love with me. And stay in love with others. And keep these commandments of love. Anything not of love, I will burn it away. It's worthless. It's absolutely worthless. To follow Jesus is to love others in such a way that it reflects the image of God, like each person is made. And I hate to break it to you, this is extraordinarily difficult. And extraordinarily easy at the same time. We're not always awesome at loving each other. And it's possibly why John's writings are so focused on love, because it is of utmost importance as living as Jesus followers, and it marks you as a person of faith, the way you treat others. But you know what? Life with others becomes monotonous. We can have feelings of being left out from other groups. We can get confused by the behaviour of others, sometimes annoyed, sometimes agitated. We can even become a bit bored with certain routine things. We can not talk to others because we don't know them. We can be intimidated. We can feel like we might pass them in the street and pretend that we didn't see them because we don't know what to say. All of these things go on in the human condition, and none of us are immune to them. And try as we might, we will still experience times when we have to really push ourselves past these human conditions to truly love another person. Particularly when we've decided their behaviour is not the way it should be. For those of you that don't know, I live on site at Fusion with a bunch of people supporting young people experiencing homelessness. And those that have lived in this environment do so because they believe the love of Christ is of utmost importance, and the vulnerable really need to experience that love more than anyone else. Or particularly so, I should say, not more than anyone else. And I want to tell you a little story about a fella called, I'm going to call him Dylan. He lived with us some years ago. And Dylan came to us at around, he was still at school, so he might have been 16, 17. And he had a great relationship with his grandparents. They were beautiful people, I think Latvian, some kind of Eastern European. And they were really worried about him. And they used to drop in like homemade little foods for him, beautiful things, constantly calling, checking on how he was. Because of their health stuff, they couldn't have him living with them, and he was hard to support. It wasn't that he was a really naughty, bad type of behaviour fella, but he struggled to take responsibility for his actions, and he kind of avoid taking responsibility as well. So he was a little bit slippery, a little bit sly, a little bit lazy. Some of it was just self-interest. Some of it was, hello, teenager. But a lot of ways he was a good lad. He was, when you were around him, he was quite good within a group. He wasn't nasty to anyone. He, mostly went to school. He loved his youth group. He came on day trips with us, and if you were right in front of him, you asked him to do something, he'd do it. He presented reasonably well. But that sneaky stuff, he would disappear with mates as soon as your back was turned. As soon as your back was turned, it was on, actually. And he'd lie to avoid consequences. He would pinch food that belonged to others, and then deny it unless you busted him red-handed. This type of stuff. He would... And the reality of it, he's a teenager. His prefrontal cortex that tells him about responsibility and consequences isn't fully developed. You expect this sort of stuff. With all of our young people that live with us, we really try to help them to understand how to manage finances and how to live in a way that won't get them kicked out of their next accommodation. So maintaining domestic responsibilities. And I tell you, it's an uphill battle. It's one we'll never really win, but we might plant a few seeds along the way. And Dylan was particularly terrible at these things. And his budgeting was atrocious. We get often Centrelink. I think he was on Centrelink. I don't remember him having a job, but he just, as soon as it hit his hand, it was gone on useless things. And he had a little bit of a budget laid out for him, and we asked them to pay a small amount of rent. It's like $40 or something like that a week in his circumstances, but that he couldn't maintain it. And there was one incident where I was upstairs with them. I was doing the weekly room inspection, helping them with maintaining vacuuming and all these sorts of things. Doona covers, putting a Doona cover on is like the worst thing to learn. And so that his room, of course, is the shambles. And then I say to him, how's your lodgings going, mate? Or I was about to ask him about that. And he said to me, hey, Gemma, check this out. And he whips his shirt off, and he's got the most horrendous tiger tattoo on his back you've ever seen in your life. The sort of thing that you'd see on the internet, like bad life choices. And it's massive, this thing. It's not even fully coloured in yet. And all I can see is that is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And it's the sort of thing, by the time you get to 40, you just he's never going to take his shirt off again. And isn't it cool? And I tell you, I had to grit my teeth to have and work out when it is we have a conversation about the appropriateness of this and his life choices. And I've got to tell you, I found him to be an extraordinarily frustrating person. Despite everything I understand about adolescent behaviour, development of the brain, he wasn't really that bad with other kids. He wasn't, I knew about his mum and dad kicked him out for his sexuality, to be honest. All of those things that makes my heart break. When I was around him, my blood boiled. Really badly, and I'm sure some of you would have experienced it similarly. And I used to think things like, We paid for him to go to Uluru, all of these things. We have offered you so many opportunities. And there was part of me that felt like he was taking advantage. His beautiful grandparents taking advantage. Eventually, he moved on into a fairly good next step. Another family member took him on. And I think it was between 6 to 3 months after he moved out, his grandparents called. It was Boxing Day. He passed away. He had some medication requirements that were basic that he didn't manage. And he passed away, 17 years old. Life is so precious. Life is so precious. Ordinary life with the dishes, doing them or forgetting to do them, the vacuuming, the filling up the car with fuel, the ordinary moments, asking someone what time it is, walking past someone on the street, collecting the mail. Each moment is precious. Beware of the mundane and the things we think others should do, should be like. There are great moments, of course, weddings and babies and holidays, but it's the little moments that are with us most of the time. And it's the ordinary people that we're used to that are with us most of the time, and they're precious. And when we slip into whatever habitual life, carelessness and forgetfulness, we forget that each person is so very precious. You are precious. You are loved by God. There is no one else like you. The person sitting next to you, only version of that person that will ever live. What a wonder. Christ died for each one of us, even when we don't do the dishes. Instead, isn't it sad that we hold on to the irritating habits of another, and that's what we're left with? That person that left the milk out that time. That person that cut us off in the car park. Or perhaps worse, perhaps we don't even consider folk at all. Because I can be so loud, my needs can overshadow everything, what I want. Dwelling about that embarrassing thing I did that no one even cares about. Or perhaps it was feelings that I wasn't good enough to ask to do the reading in church. Or I wasn't included. None of those things are accurate. John's message, love one another, love God. That is true. I reckon John and the Apostle Paul had their work cut out for us. That message they were giving that church is still the message for the church today. We can hear it in Paul's letter to Colossians. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has any grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. To the church of Ephesus, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another. Have you ever considered what it's like to not only love someone, but to bear with them as well? That's not an easy person, my friends. God is our life source, the vine. Love is our fruit, and love is so perfectly ordinary. And who among us understands how perfectly ordinary and simple love can be? I reckon if you listen to the Gospels, you hear it, Jesus points to kids. Kids get it. The little baby, when first that baby recognises you as mum and dad, or granddad and grandma, and their little face lights up when they see you. How magical is that? That's love. That's how we're created to be. That when you get down on the floor and play with a child, Cliff, don't get down. The kids can play at the table with you. But When you play with children one-on-one and they recognise that you're there for them and they can trust you and they behave differently, you know, that free spirit love, that's beautiful. And children, when they know something isn't fair for someone else, when kids walk past someone in the city that's sleeping rough and they say, what do you mean this person hasn't got a home? If you've ever experienced one of those conversations, that's horrendous. That is because that little person knows that it's not how people should be treated. This is the kind of love any of us are capable of doing towards another person. And we get to practice it every day with everyday actions, like hold your tongue and listen instead of cutting someone off. I find that hard in ordinary life, it's true. Make a phone call to somebody else to ask them how they're going, even when that phone call is going to be hard and you'd rather start the dinner. Abide in me and bear much fruit. What is an ordinary moment that lets you know you are loved? What's a simple action someone does in your world that you recognise? That's a moment for me. Feel free to share something. Oh, that is a treasure.
It is when you're getting up to go to work at 5:30 in the morning and you go, oh no, I don't.
Yes, that's beautiful. My husband puts the rubbish out. I just keep putting it in and hope and push it a bit until the bag breaks. And he never says I do that. He just takes it out and cleans the bin out. And I'll come back in, the insert to the bin. I'll say, why is it? I crack it because it's still outside. It's because he's had to wash it because I've made a massive mess of it. How about for others? What is an ordinary moment that lets you know that you're cared for, that you're loved? Sorry? Phone calls, yes. Friends that reach out. Isn't that lovely? Very special. These are the treasures of life, folks. And you can give these treasures and you can receive these treasures. And they build into our character. If this becomes a habit, they will change your character to one of love. What a beautiful pathway. Before we take communion together, I want to share with you another letter of Paul from Philippi to the Church of Philippi, chapter 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think of such things. The moments that build us into a character of love. And of course, before his death, Jesus said, remember me through the very ordinary action of having something to eat and something to drink with your mates, with those you love, because the Spirit of God and brother Jesus is with us. And the Son, the divine Trinity, through the Son, the divine Trinity throws itself open for all of us to participate with. So come and grab your ordinary piece of cracker and juice, because you are loved.